Thank you, Brian. Now we go from the ridiculous to the sublime. Well, about 10 years ago, I can clearly remember a friend of mine rushing over to me and telling me about a wonderful new Australian singer he'd heard about called Lana Cantrell. So I took his advice, went out to the nearest record store and bought Then There Was Lana, and I was hooked. I followed Lana's career. I went to the Maisonette when it still existed to hear her sing. I caught her at Marty's when that existed to hear her sing. And I understand that Lana has now returned to New York, and she's going to be opening tomorrow night at the beautiful Park 10 Club. Thank you, Lana Cantrell, for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much.
And it's a pleasure having you back in New York.
Sounds like I'm closing clubs.
No,
the
no.
Maisonette when it was there, Marty's when it was there. Thank you. Are you coming to review me? I hope you enjoyed me as much as you enjoyed it.
Brian may be along, as a matter of fact.
Good.
Well, what's kept you away from New York for so long, from the club scene?
There have been no clubs. No club scene.
As simple as that?
Very simple. When Marty's closed, there really weren't nightclubs in the city. Caroline's opened, and they were having singers for a while. Then it became just for
comedy room now.
comedy.
Yeah.
There was really nothing in town, and now Park 10 is there, and so am I.
Well, I'm glad that you're back. I seem to remember, though, from the earlier albums and from your gigs at the Maisonette, that you were at one time into romantic and slightly pop music. Then you went into jazz when you were at Marty's. What's the style Lana Cantrell is doing these days?
I never went really fully into jazz. It's more middle of the road. I do some things like some Air Supply songs and maybe a Sergio Mendes thing. I guess middle of the road is the only way to explain it. I do a couple of jazz-oriented things, but I do old songs, new songs, anything that I hear that takes my fancy.
Well, there was one album I remember was my favorite. The cover is all ripped to shreds. It was Act 3, right, with the gown and the smoke.
Wasn't the nude, was it? No,
it wasn't the nude.
Ripped to shreds.
But that was the one I used to play when I was in my romantic Sturm und Drang period.
Well, I probably was in the same period. My album, I can listen to some of my albums and I think, oh my God, I was so depressed then when I did that.
But it's a wonderful depression.
Yes. There was a lot of Charles Aznavour and
definitely.
French ballads. One could commit suicide too. Charles Aznavour, yes. Gilbert Bécaud, yes.
Definitely. Can you give us any indication about what you'll be doing tomorrow when you open at the Park 10? Because I know I'm at least interested to find out.
Nobody else is.
No.
Just because you are.
I'm your greatest fan.
Good. With lesser ones, I would be in a lot of trouble. What am I doing? Again, what I said, middle of the road things. I'm doing some Peter Allen things.
Oh, great. A fellow Australian.
Peter and I grew up at one point in Australia. A couple of his songs. Sergio Mendes, who I mentioned before. I actually do a Michael Jackson song. Bits and pieces. I do a jazz medley, a swing medley of whatever comes into my little head.
Any romantic stuff?
One or two. Yeah. There are a couple of romantic things. Again, if the mood takes me.
I understand also, I think we've discussed this, that you have some sort of elaborate backup with synthesizers and instrumentation.
It's not overly elaborate. The room is rather small. It holds about 100 people, and the stage is not huge. So my keyboard player has an acoustic piano, Fender Rhodes, and synthesizer. But we can't do anything overly elaborate because it would drown everything out. So it'll be fairly simple. It's just a trio behind me. But
so you have a musical backup and voices.
Yeah.
I was wondering, I think everyone knows that Lana Cantrell grew up in Australia, Sydney, I believe.
Yes.
And when you were growing up in Sydney, did you have any aim or hopes of performing in the States at that time?
Oh, yeah. You know, when you work in Australia, or really I think any country, the only thing you can do is aim at America, because this is the Mecca. You've got to, if you want to accomplish anything, you've got to come to America. America does it bigger and better than everybody else.
So the first goal for Australians is not to go to England.
It used to be to go to England because it was easier for us to get into England because we're British subjects and everything. It's hard to get green cards and things to come over to America.
But you did get the America's Cup, so you did that better
than
we
did. Oh, we did that, yes.
Yes.
We kept trying until we got that one right.
You certainly did.
Now we're going to hold on to it. Now you're going to have to come over there, and we're going to make you sail your little boats over there, across the Pacific.
We've learned our humility. We'll take it back next year.
No, I didn't see any humility.
Unless they capsize us in those shark-infested
Oh,
waters.
don't put that past us for a minute.
When you were growing up also in Australia, did you have any specific idols, I mean, that you wanted to imitate in singing, male or female?
Yeah, I was very jazz-oriented when I was young because my father was a bass player and a jazz musician. So Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan,
great choices.
very, very heavily into jazz. Then when I got to America, for some reason I switched everything. I got very involved in French music. I went to see the Umbrellas of Cherbourg and Michel Legrand and Michel Aznavour and Gilbert Bécaud, and I went nuts for all of that sort of thing for a while. And now I've sort of put everything together, and I sort of do what I think I do.
Well, I know I'm looking forward tomorrow to seeing you at the Park 10.
Thank you.
And thank you, Lana Cantrell, for joining us tonight on the show. It's been a pleasure seeing you, meeting you in